how does a static file of code turn into this living, breathing thing? Well, the answer to all of that is the DOM. So here's our game plan. We'll start with the basics, just understanding what the DOM even is. Then we'll get into the fun stuff, selecting and creating content and making pages interactive by listening to users. After that, we'll level up and talk performance and security. And finally, we'll peek into the future with something called the Shadow DOM. All right, first things first. What in the world is the DOM? The best way to think about it is as a living blueprint for your web page. See, when a browser gets your HTML, it doesn't just see a block of text. It translates all that code into this beautiful, organized, tree-like structure. And that is the DOM. It's what lets our JavaScript connect with the page, giving us the power to read it, change it, and update it in real time. Now, this is a really important point to get. Our JavaScript can change the text from hello to hi right there in the browser. But the original HTML file that's sitting on the server, it's completely unchanged. The DOM is a live model that exists only in the browser's memory. We're manipulating that, not the static file itself. Okay, so we know what the DOM is. Now, for the fun part. Let's get our hands on the actual tools we need to start changing it. Before you can change anything, you have to be able to find it, right? If you want to update a score or change a username, you need to tell the browser exactly which element you're talking about. So, how do we do that? We've got a few key tools in our belts. If you need to grab one specific element and you need it to be lightning fast, Get Element by ID is your go-to. But for pretty much everything else, Query Selector is the modern workhorse. It's super versatile because it uses the same CSS selectors you already know and love. And if you need to grab a whole bunch of things at once, say all the items in a list, that's what Query Selector all is for. And what about adding brand new content? Well, it's a pretty simple three-step dance. First, you create the element, but it only exists in memory. Second, you add your text or whatever else you need. And finally, you tell the browser where to put it using something like append child. Then, and only then, does it actually appear on the page for everyone to see. All right, our page has content, but it's just sitting there. A page that can't respond to a user isn't much of an application. So how do we start listening for what our users are actually doing? To really listen efficiently, you first need to understand this natural behavior called event bubbling. It's pretty cool. When you click on, say, a button, that click event doesn't just stop there. It actually bubbles up the DOM tree. It notifies the button's parent, then its grandparent, and so on, all the way up to the top of the page. And because of this bubbling behavior, we can use an incredibly clever and powerful pattern called event delegation. The idea is, instead of putting 10 different listeners on 10 different buttons, you just put one single listener on the container that holds them all. It's so much smarter. So why is this such a big deal? Well, for one, it uses way less memory, which makes your page faster. 2, it automatically works for new elements you might add later. You don't have to write any extra code. And 3, it's just cleaner, more professional code. It's a huge win all around. So we can make things work. But there's a huge difference between making something work and making it work well. This is where we go from just being a developer to being a master of the craft. You have to remember, every single time you change the DOM, you're potentially asking the browser to do a ton of work. It might have to recalculate the layout of the entire page, that's called a reflow, and then repaint the whole screen. If you do that too many times in a row, you get that horrible, janky, sluggish feeling that everyone hates. So how do we stay fast? Here are some pro tips. First, try to batch your changes together to minimize those expensive reflows. If you're adding a bunch of new elements, build them all off screen in what's called a document fragment, then add them to the page in one single operation. And here's a golden rule. Never, ever put a DOM query inside a big loop. Grab the element you need once before the loop starts. Okay, performance is a big deal, but nothing, and I mean nothing, is more important than keeping your users safe. Look at this. This right here is probably the single most important security rule in all of DOM manipulation. On the left, we're taking some input and putting it on the page with inner HTML. The browser sees the script tag and runs it. Big problem. On the right, we take the exact same input but use text content instead. The browser just treats it like plain text and displays it safely. One is a massive vulnerability, the other is completely harmless. This kind of attack has a name. It's called cross-site scripting, or XSS. It's one of the most common vulnerabilities on the web, and it happens when you blindly trust user input. The rule is simple. If you are displaying content that came from a user, you always use text content. All right, for our final section, let's take a look at where things are going. Modern web development, as you know, is all about building things out of reusable, self-contained components. But that creates a classic problem, right? You build this perfect, beautiful button component, but then the main website CSS accidentally breaks its design, or even worse, the styles from your component leak out and mess up the rest of the page. It's a nightmare. Well, the answer to that nightmare is the shadow DOM. Think of it like giving an element its own secret hidden DOM tree that's completely walled off from the rest of the page. It's inside this little protected bubble. Styles can't get in and styles can't get out. Its behavior is totally self-contained. This is the magic that powers modern web components. So as you start building bigger and more complex applications, this idea of creating isolated, reusable components isn't just some niche skill anymore. It's really becoming a fundamental part of a modern developer's toolkit. So there you have it. We've seen how the DOM is the living blueprint of the web. We've learned the tools to change it, and we've covered why it's so critical to do it both efficiently and safely. You now hold the keys to creating truly dynamic, interactive experiences.